In the grand theater of family life, everyone gets a role. You're assigned one early on, usually before you can even read the script, and the ink on that casting contract is indelible. There's the peacemaker, forever smoothing ruffled feathers. The troublemaker, a walking, talking plot device. The golden child, bathed in a perpetual, unearned spotlight. And the black sheep, whose main function is to make the rest of the flock look whiter. My role. I was the stage, the beautifully set, meticulously prepared, structurally sound stage upon which my older brother, Frank, performed the one-man show. Of his life, my parents, Richard and Eleanor, were, of course, the producers. They financed the production. They wrote the glowing 5-star reviews for an audience of anyone who would listen. And they were always there to hand him a bouquet of roses at every single curtain call. It's not that they didn't love me. They did, in their own specific, utilitarian way. They loved me the way a theater owner loves their venue. They appreciated my structural integrity, kept me clean and presentable, and expected me to be available and perfectly lit whenever the star was ready for his next scene. My entire life has been a series of opening nights for him, and I was getting profoundly, deeply tired of the show. The pattern wasn't a sudden development. It was a slow, creeping erosion of my own significance, like a coastline giving way to a relentless tide. It was established early and reinforced at every milestone. For my sweet 16, I'd planned what I thought was the perfect party. Not a lavish affair, but an intimate gathering in our backyard. I'd strung fairy lights in the old oak tree, created a meticulously curated playlist of 90s alt-rock, and my friends and I were giddy on cheap soda and the thrill of being 16. The moment came to cut the cake, a glorious, multi-layered confection from our local bakery. As I stood before the 16 flickering candles, taking a deep breath to make my wish, Frank, then a self-important freshman in college, clinked a spoon against a crystal glass. An auditory seizure of the spotlight. He stood up, a confident smirk playing on his lips. If I could have everyone's attention for just a moment, he announced, his voice booming with unearned authority. He launched into a long, rambling speech, not about me or my birthday, but about his own recent triumphs. He concluded by raising his glass. And so, I'd like to announce to my family and all of Marissa's friends that I have been accepted into a highly prestigious summer internship program with a top investment bank in London. The rest of the evening ceased to be about my birthday. It became the Franks going to London gala. My parents were ecstatic, their faces shining with pride. "Isn't it wonderful, honey?" my mother whispered to me later as she cleared away my half-eaten, forgotten slice of cake. To be able to share such a special, exciting moment with your brother, sharing. It was always framed as sharing, when in reality, it was a hostile takeover. 4 years later, the stage was a fancy Italian restaurant. The occasion, my college graduation dinner. I had graduated summa cum laude with a degree in art history, a fact that was mentioned once in passing before the appetizers arrived. Then, between the calamari and the lasagna, Frank, now a junior analyst with an ego inflated by his first reel bonus, once again commandeered the toast. He regaled the table not with praise for my years of hard work, but with a 20-minute, jargon-filled saga about a high-stakes deal he had just helped close. He drew charts on cocktail napkins. He used terms like leveraged buyout and hostile takeover with a relish that felt deeply ironic. My quiet, academic achievement felt flimsy and frivolous in comparison to his tales of corporate warfare. My father clapped him on the back, his eyes gleaming. "That's my boy. he declared to the table. A real shark. I, apparently, was just a guppy swimming in his wake, an afterthought in the grand narrative of his ascent. Even my first home, my first real piece of adult independence, wasn't safe. I'd saved for years to buy a small but charming condo in the city. I was so proud I could burst. I invited my family and a few close friends to a housewarming party. Frank arrived an hour late, not with a bottle of wine or a thoughtful houseplant, but with his own, much grander housewarming gift to himself. He stood in my doorway and jangled a new set of keys. "Sorry I'm late," he announced to the room. "Had to pick up my new baby." He led everyone out of my carefully decorated living room and into the parking lot to admire his new sports car. It was an obnoxious, cherry red convertible that looked like a midlife crisis on wheels. He revved the engine, a deafening roar that drowned out the indie music I had playing. For the rest of the night, the conversation wasn't about my new home, it was about Frank's horsepower and torque ratios. He wasn't just the star, he was the sun, a blazing gas giant of narcissism, and everyone else was just a planet caught in his gravitational pull. A pull I was beginning to realize I couldn't escape. I would have to disrupt the laws of physics themselves. But all of it was just the opening act, the prelude to his magnum opus. The ultimate, unforgivable hijack occurred at my wedding to Ben, the kindest, most centered, most wonderfully normal man I had ever met, was supposed to be the one. Event so sacred, so fundamentally mine, that even Frank wouldn't dare lay a finger on it. It was a fortress of matrimony I thought was impenetrable. I was naive. The ceremony, held in a beautiful old botanical garden, was perfect. The vows we wrote ourselves were heartfelt and real. The reception, in a historic hotel ballroom with soaring ceilings and crystal chandeliers, was a warm, glowing bubble of happiness. For a few precious hours, I was the center of the story. I was the bride. And then came the father-daughter dance. The band, a fantastic jazz ensemble, began to play a soft, instrumental version of Louis Armstrong's "What a Wonderful World." My father took my hand, his eyes misty with a genuine, unforced emotion that was rare for him. It was a perfect, crystalline moment, the kind you know you'll remember for the rest of your life. We swayed gently on the polished dance floor, just the two of us in the soft amber spotlight, the faces of our friends and family a happy, blurry backdrop. The world had fallen away. And then, from the speakers, I heard it, a high-pitched, piercing screech of feedback from the microphone. I glanced over at the stage, and my blood ran cold. Frank was standing there, holding the mic, a triumphant, almost messianic grin on his face. "Excuse me, everyone," he boomed, his voice echoing through the grand ballroom, shattering the intimate moment into a million pieces. "Excuse me, Dad, Marissa. I am so sorry to interrupt this beautiful moment, but there's another beautiful moment that just simply cannot wait." My father and I froze mid-sway. The music faltered, a few confused notes hanging in the air before dying completely. 150 guests turned as one to stare at the stage. Frank's long-suffering girlfriend, Rachel, a genuinely sweet girl who deserved a medal for her service, looked up at him from her table, her brow furrowed in confusion. "Rachel," Frank continued, his voice now dripping with a syrupy emotion. He had clearly practiced in front of a mirror. "You are the love of my life, my rock, my everything. I know this is sudden, but I am just so overwhelmed by all the love in this room tonight. It's infectious." He walked from the stage onto the dance floor, moving towards her like a predator approaching its prey. He dropped to one knee, the movement fluid from practice, and pulled a small, ostentatious velvet box from his pocket. "Rachel, will you make me the happiest, luckiest man in the entire world? Will you marry me?" The room was silent for a half-second, a collective intake of breath. Then it exploded. There were gasps, then high-pitched screams of delight, then a thunderous, sustained applause that was far louder than the applause after Ben and I had said "I do." My own mother, Eleanor, burst into tears of pure joy. Guests surged from their seats, creating a mob around Frank and a stunned, tearful Rachel, who was now sporting a diamond the size of a small planet. My father, after a moment's hesitation that I will never forget, dropped my hand, leaving me standing alone, and rushed over to be the first to hug his son. Ben quickly came to my side, his face a mask of controlled fury. But we were invisible. We were left standing alone on the vast expanse of the dance floor. The spotlight operator, following the action, had swung the beam over to the new, more interesting drama. Ben and I had become decorative furniture at our own wedding. We were no longer the bride and groom. We were the perplexed hosts of Frank and Rachel's surprise engagement party in that moment, watching my family and friends celebrate my brother's brazen, hostile takeover of the most important day of my life. Something inside me didn't just break. It calcified. It transformed from wounded, bleeding flesh into something cold, strategic, and diamond hard. The show was over. It was time to burn down the theater. Weeks later, the dust had barely settled. The air in our new apartment was still thick with the scent of dried wedding flowers and the lingering bitterness of betrayal. We were still wading through a mountain of thank you notes for gifts, many of which included gushing, handwritten addendums, congratulating Frank and Rachel. We were at my parents' house for a tense, obligatory Sunday dinner when Frank, with the unearned confidence of a man who has never faced a single negative consequence in his life, decided to unveil his next production. So, he began, dabbing the corners of his mouth with a linen napkin with a flourish. "Rachel and I have been talking, and while the proposal at the wedding was, well, it was spontaneous and beautiful," he said, with a magnanimous nod, in my direction that made my teeth ache. "We feel we want to do something more official, a proper, planned moment for the family." I held my breath, my grip on my wine glass so tight I was surprised it didn't shatter. Ben put a calming hand on my knee under the table. "Mom, Dad," Frank said, turning to them with a beatific smile, "your 40th anniversary party is next month. It's going to be such a special, elegant night, a real milestone. I was thinking, during the toast to you, that's when I'll do it. For real this time. It'll be a tribute to your for decades of enduring love, and a beautiful, public promise of our own future. It'll be perfect." He had to be kidding. It was a joke. It had to be a joke. He was planning, with forethought and what could only be described as malice, to hijack another sacred family event. He showed no remorse, no flicker of self-awareness. He saw my wedding not as a monumental transgression, but as a successful dress rehearsal for his main performance. I slowly turned my head to look at my parents, expecting, for one last, foolish second, a flicker of dissent, a moment of clarity, a defense of their only daughter. Instead, my mother's face lit up like a Christmas tree. "Oh, Frank, that's the most romantic thing I've ever heard," she gushed, clasping her hands together. "Of course you can. It would be an honor to share our night with you." My father nodded in solemn, proud agreement. "A Beautiful idea, son. A passing of the torch from one generation to the next. I felt a dizzying wave of disbelief, so potent it was almost nauseating. They were actively, enthusiastically co-signing the next heist. I opened my mouth to argue, to scream, to lay out the long and sordid history of his emotional kleptomania, complete with dates and exhibits. But then I looked at Frank's smug, expectant face, and at my parents' beaming, oblivious one, and I closed it, because in that moment, I understood. You don't fight a wildfire with a bucket of gasoline. You don't reason with a hurricane. Arguing with them would be pointless. It would only cast me, once again, in the role they had written for me. The bitter, jealous, overly sensitive sister. So, I did the last thing any of them expected. I smiled. A slow, wide, brilliant smile. Frank, I said, my voice as smooth and sweet as poisoned honey. That's a truly wonderful idea. It sounds incredibly romantic. It'll be a night no one will ever forget. He beamed, completely disarmed by my capitulation. My parents looked at me with relieved approval. See? Their expressions said, Marissa is finally growing up. She's being a good sport. But internally, a plan was beginning to crystallize. The hot, messy anger had cooled and compressed into a flawless, multifaceted diamond of a plan. It was no longer an emotional impulse. It was a cold, calculated, strategic blueprint. Frank's narcissism was his greatest strength, but I would make it his greatest vulnerability. His entire existence was predicated on being the sole focus of attention. He didn't just need the spotlight. He was pathologically incapable of sharing it. So, I wouldn't try to take it from him. I would give him so much of it, from so many different directions, that it would overload his circuits. It would blind him. This time would be different. This time, I would be the director. And the show was going to be spectacular. My mission began where all modern espionage begins. On social media. Rachel, bless her naive, oversharing heart, was an enthusiastic and prolific poster on Instagram. Over the next week, I became a devoted, obsessive student of her feed. She posted a lovingly filtered photo of the embossed invitation. Richard and Eleanor's 40th anniversary celebration. The Grand Oak Ballroom, Saturday, October 22nd. 2 days later, she posted a glowing selfie with my mother at the venue itself. A planning day #, best future mother-in-law and # event goals. I zoomed in on the background of the photo, downloading the image and analyzing it like the Zapruder film. I noted the layout of the room, the position of the stage and the main dance floor, the location of the bar, the dessert tables, the exits. The final, crucial piece of intelligence came, ironically, from Frank himself, via Rachel's account. She posted a screenshot of a text message from him, complete with heart emojis. The text read, "Babe, the big moment is happening at 8 p.m. sharp, during my toast. Don't be late. Be ready." He had given me the exact time, the exact place, and the exact weapon. The fatal flaw was already in my possession. His pathological inability to share the spotlight. His narcissism wasn't just about wanting to be the center of attention. It was about controlling the entire narrative. He needed to be the hero, the most interesting, most romantic, most successful man in any room. Anything that competed with that narrative wasn't just an annoyance to him. It was an existential threat, a tear in the fabric of his reality. My plan, therefore, couldn't be a direct, frontal assault. That would be too simple, too easy for him to dismiss. It had to be a multi-front war of escalating, competing narratives. each one more compelling, more heartwarming, more universally appealing than his. I wasn't just going to upstage him. I was going to build a whole new, better, more interesting stage right on top of his. And he would be crushed under the weight of all that joy. My first call was to my oldest and dearest friend, Chloe. Chloe was a force of nature, a whirlwind of creative energy who ran a small, perpetually struggling, but artistically brilliant community theater group out of a converted warehouse downtown. I met her for coffee at a noisy cafe, the perfect place for a clandestine meeting. I laid out my idea, framing it carefully in the language I knew she would understand. I have a concept for a piece of experimental performance art, I began, trying to sound like a serious, avant-garde patron of the arts, an immersive, guerrilla theater experience. I'm calling it the public and private language of love. I want to explore how public displays of affection are perceived in a formal, celebratory setting. Chloe leaned forward, her eyes gleaming with interest, her skepticism melting away. I'm listening, she said, pushing her glasses up her nose. The venue is a large, upscale ballroom. During a real event, I said, the performance would consist of a series of small, overlapping vignettes, 8 of them, to be precise, different couples, different scenarios, reconciliation, a first proposal, a vow renewal, a pregnancy announcement, all culminating in a moment of choreographed, joyful chaos. I have a budget. The word budget was the magic key that unlocked her full creative genius. An hour later, fueled by caffeine and a shared love of elaborate schemes, we had a solid plan, which we codenamed Operation Crescendo. I recruited 8 couples from her acting troupe, a diverse and wonderfully talented group of performers, who were thrilled by the prospect of a paying gig and a truly bizarre artistic challenge. We had our cast, the bar brawlers, the cannoli couple, the baby makers, the golden agers, and so on. My next call was to my friend from business school, Grace. Grace was a project manager for a major construction firm, a woman with a mind like a steel trap who lived for logistics, for spreadsheets, for color-coded timelines. She found my idea chaotic and inefficient, but fascinating. Together, we scouted the venue during a public open house one Sunday afternoon. We paced the room, timed the walk from the bar to the stage, noted the acoustics from every corner. We went back to my condo and, over a bottle of wine, created a detailed, minute-by-minute, multi-tab spreadsheet that became our show Bible. Each of the 8 couples was assigned a specific role, a specific location, a specific trigger time, and a contingency plan. Every detail was accounted for. From the volume of a staged argument to the precise moment a string quartet would receive a new, unsolicited sheet of music. It was a theatrical military operation, and Frank was marching, goose-stepping in his shiny Italian shoes, into the most elaborate ambush of his life. The night of the anniversary party was a masterpiece of suburban elegance. The Grand Oak Ballroom was beautifully decorated with flowers and soft lighting, filled to the brim with my parents' friends and our extended family, all blissfully unaware of the drama about to unfold. I found Frank near the stage, looking anxious and self-important. He kept checking his expensive watch, a nervous tick I'd never seen on him before. He was a performer with a bad case of opening night jitters. He pulled me aside, his hand gripping my elbow. "Everything looks great, Marissa," he said, his eyes scanning the room as if he were a general surveying his troops. 8 p.m. That's my slot. Make sure Mom and Dad are front and center. I want them to have a perfect view. "Don't worry, Frank," I said, patting his arm with a serene smile. I've got it all under control. At exactly 7:45 p.m., the first domino fell. Near the crowded bar, our bar brawlers, a young, passionate couple from Chloe's troupe, began to have a loud, dramatic, but ultimately harmless argument that quickly morphed into a tearful, public reconciliation. I was a fool to ever doubt your commitment, Michael, the woman cried, loud enough for half the room to turn and stare. It was just enough of a distraction to be annoying. A small tear in the fabric of his perfect evening. Frank shot them a dirty look but didn't panic. He saw them as amateurs. Just some trashy couple who didn't know how to behave. At 7:50 p.m., the second domino, by the sprawling dessert table, another one of our couples, the sweet, doe-eyed cannoli couple, enacted a beautifully simple scene. The young man, feigning a sudden inspiration, dropped to one knee, professing his undying love over a plate of cannolis. A small but enthusiastic crowd gathered around them, cooing and applauding. Frank's jaw clenched. I saw it from across the room. He was no longer the only proposal of the evening. His unique, brilliant idea was becoming a trend. At 7:55 p.m., the third and most disruptive domino, a handsome, well-dressed couple at a central table stood up. The man tapped his champagne glass for attention. Friends, family, he announced, his voice choked with real-seeming emotion. My beautiful wife, Sarah, and I have some news we just can't keep to ourselves any longer. After 5 long years of trying, we're pregnant. The room erupted. A pregnancy announcement. The nuclear option. The kryptonite of all other announcements. The room's attention, which had been fractured, now swung decisively and completely in their direction. A wave of congratulations and happy tears swept the room. Frank looked apoplectic. His face was a thundercloud of fury. He was losing control of the room before he even took the stage. It was 7:58 p.m. 2 minutes to showtime. Frank, seeing his meticulously planned moment of glory slipping away into a sea of other people's happines, made a desperate, panicked move. He strode to the stage, snatched the microphone from the startled band leader, and tapped it aggressively, the sound echoing like a gunshot. If I could have everyone's attention, he barked, his voice strained and tight with repressed rage. The room quieted, but the energy, the emotional focus, was still buzzing around the pregnant couple. Tonight, he began, trying to regain his composure. We are here to celebrate 40 years of incredible, inspiring love. He was just getting into his practiced, self-aggrandizing speech when the coup de grace was delivered. As per my timeline, Grace, looking like just another guest, had discreetly approached the string quartet. As Frank began to speak, she handed their leader a new piece of sheet music. Suddenly, the quartet stopped their gentle background music and began to play a rich, beautiful rendition of Pachelbel's Canon. And from a corner table, our golden agers, a distinguished, elegant elderly couple from the acting troupe, slowly rose and walked to the center of the dance floor. My dearest Eleanor, the old man said, his voice surprisingly strong, amplified by a small, hidden microphone Chloe had planted on their table earlier. 60 years ago, in a little church in Brooklyn, I promised you a lifetime of happiness. Tonight, my love, I want to promise you forever. Will you do me the honor of renewing your vows with me right here, right now? It was utterly, unimpeachably beautiful. It was pure, distilled romance. The entire room melted. Frank stood on the stage, speechless, the microphone hanging uselessly in his hand, as the attention of every single person including our own weeping parents, turned to the old couple. And then, as they began to recite their vows, the true chaos was unleashed. Simultaneously, as rehearsed, 3 more proposals erupted around the room like synchronized fireworks. One of our actors, a handsome single dad, proposed to his girlfriend with his adorable young daughter holding the ring box. Across the room, a woman dropped to one knee and proposed to her stunned, overjoyed boyfriend, shattering gender norms. And near the back, in perfect, beautiful silence, a young man began to propose to his deaf partner in elegant, emotional American Sign Language. The room was a kaleidoscope of romance, a living, breathing montage of love stories. The infectious energy was so powerful that 2 real couples, not part of our cast at all, got swept up in the moment and had their own spontaneous, tearful, genuine proposals. It was a wildfire of love, and it was burning Frank's world to the ground. In the middle of this beautiful, swirling, joyful chaos, Frank made his last, pathetic stand. With the microphone still clutched in his hand like a drowning man holding a rock, he dropped to one knee, right there on the stage, and shouted over the din, "Rachel, will you marry me?" But his voice was just one more sound in a symphony of celebration. It was lost in the noise. Rachel, who had been watching the unfolding spectacle with dawning, abject horror, looked at him not with love, but with pure, unadulterated humiliation. She knew what this was. She knew he couldn't stand not being the center of it all. She shook her head, a small, sharp movement, and whispered, her voice inaudible to anyone but him, but her meaning clear to me. "Not like this, Frank. Not like this." And she backed away from the stage, swallowed by the happy crowd. And then, the finale. The 8 acting couples, their romantic vignettes complete, converged on the main dance floor and broke into a perfectly choreographed, joyfully cheesy, and utterly irresistible flash mob dance to Stevie Wonder's signed, sealed, delivered "I'm Yours." Frank was left kneeling alone on the stage, a forgotten prop in a show he hadn't directed. The single, harsh spotlight he so desperately craved was now 1,000 tiny beams of light, reflected in champagne flutes and happy tears, shining on everyone and everything but him. No one even noticed as he stood up, his face ashen, and slipped out a side exit into the night. He had been so thoroughly, so completely, so artistically upstaged. He hadn't even been the star of his own humiliation. The most delicious, most ironic part of the entire evening was my parents' reaction. They were absolutely, unequivocally, ecstatic. They floated through the rest of the party, their faces aglow, giddy with a completely misplaced sense of accomplishment. "Can you believe it, Marissa?" my mother said to me later, her eyes sparkling as she grabbed my hands. Our love inspired all of this. 40 years together, and we create an atmosphere so supercharged with romance that everyone just had to get engaged. This was, without a doubt, the most romantic party in history. My father nodded, puffing out his chest. "We really set the tone," he said, with the gravity of a man who believed he had personally willed it into existence. "It just goes to show you what a strong foundation, what a real commitment, can do for people." They had taken full, unadulterated credit for the entire, meticulously staged production. The dramatic irony was so thick and rich you could have cut it with a cake knife. They were so cocooned in their own self-regard, so used to seeing their family as an extension of themselves, that they had completely misinterpreted the entire event. They never once questioned it. Frank's sudden disappearance was written off as him being overcome with emotion, and wanting to give Rachel a private moment. They were, and always would be, completely and utterly, blissfully oblivious. Frank and Rachel broke up a week later. She told him, according to the family grapevine, that she couldn't marry a man who saw her as a prop in his own movie. And his behavior at family gatherings changed so dramatically it was almost unsettling. He became quiet. He was subdued, anxious. He no longer held court at the head of the dinner table. He didn't interrupt. He sat at the edge of conversations, fidgeting with his silverware, a haunted look in his eyes. The night of 8 proposals, as it became known in family lore, was a story told at every holiday, every birthday, every family get-together. My parents would recount it with glee, embellishing it more with each telling, and Frank would have to sit there, silent and mortified, his face turning a pale shade of green, listening to the epic tale of his own public neutering. He had been so thoroughly traumatized by the loss of control, so terrified of being accidentally upstaged again, that he preemptively removed himself from the stage altogether. He had learned his lesson, not through a screaming match or a messy confrontation, but through a silent, elegant, and perfectly executed farce. I have never told a single soul, not my husband, Ben, who simply believes my brother finally got what he deserved, not Chloe, who thinks she was part of a brilliant piece of high-concept art, not Grace, who just thinks I'm eccentric. It is my perfect, silent, secret victory. The family dynamic is permanently, irrevocably altered for the better. Frank, without his primary tool of attention-seeking narcissism, has been forced to become a more thoughtful, more present person. Our conversations are now actual conversations, with give and take. My parents, with their star player permanently benched, have started to notice the other people on the team. They ask about my life, my work, my husband. They listen to the answers. I didn't destroy my brother. I just recalibrated him. I reprogrammed him. I fixed our broken family, not with a messy, emotional confrontation that would have only ended in my own defeat and vilification, but with a perfectly executed, secret theatrical production. I finally have what I always wanted, a family where there is more than one star, a family where the stage is big enough for everyone to have their moment. And I am finally at peace. The show is over. The house lights have come up, and for the first time in my entire life, I am not the stage. I am in the audience, with the best seat in the house, enjoying the quiet, wonderful, ordinary show of my own life. And it is, at long last, a wonderful world.